Who told Watson et al. To go commit those murders?
The lawyers.
Okay, well, we're not going to go anywhere on that.
All right. Well, you want me to explain it? It's a simple thing.
What is the simple thing?
Everybody that's a crook learns this, that you cannot trust a lawyer.
Okay.
Especially a criminal lawyer. You can't trust
them. So you're saying the defense lawyers did it?
No, I'm saying if we had a place to go, we wouldn't have to go to violence. But when you got no place to go, and your children can't find a father in your system, and you lay down and you say, can I get some help? And they won't give you no help. And you get stepped on in the face, and then pretty soon you say, well, what can we do here?
Do you believe the Tate LaBianca murders had anything to do with sort of ending the period of the 60s, creating a...
Yeah, it was the peak of the love that was running. Why don't we do it? No one will be watching us. And it's banging 24 hours a day. I didn't write that music.
Okay.
Take it to the Queen of England. Ask her why she's sending her kids over here ducking from that Hindu pimp that's coming out of that New Delhi penitentiary.
If you read or listen to enough Charles Manson interviews, you eventually start to notice a pattern where Manson frequently returns to a set of phrases and ideas which on their face sound like complete gibberish. Strings of nonsense syllables, references to Malaysia, Sweden, Elvis, or Bing Crosby, calling himself the Queen of England. Manson was diagnosed with schizophrenia after all, and his psych reports were filled with this kind of stuff. Manson's speech lapses into nonsense statements with references to bizarre things. His mentality is talking weird, bizarre nonsense and bringing it out with such an expression that he says it with a sort of an everyday kind of attitude, which tends to make one try to figure out what he really means. It's pretty obvious that what he's saying is exactly what he means, and it's quite psychotic. To be sure, Manson appears to have suffered from psychotic episodes, and he was heavily medicated at different points in his incarceration. But if you dig just a little deeper, it turns out that many of the things that sound like nonsense on the surface are actually layered with both symbolic and literal meaning. Manson was an outlaw and a criminal, but he was also something of a beat poet, and was recognized as such by the artists and celebrities he socialized with in San Francisco and LA. And if we have the right context, it's often not that hard to decode Manson's beat poetic speech into something that's not only logically coherent, but also packed with meaning. Consider one of Manson's favorites. My mother was the icebox, and my father was the Second World War.
What about your mother?
Mother is the icebox.
I was brotherhood to the Korean War, and my father was the Second World War.
Now, Manson actually explained this one a little bit.
Mother is the icebox. Yeah. She's the penitentiary. One of my first recollections is walking in Moundsville State Prison, West Virginia. Big gray stone place. And I come to visit my mom. She was doing time there.
For what?
Strong arm robbery.
Manson's mother, Kathleen, went to prison early in his life. She and her brother had robbed a man using a concealed ketchup bottle they pretended was a gun, and Manson was sent to live with grandparents, aunts, and uncles before being committed to juvenile prisons and reform schools himself. The term icebox is mid-century American prison slang, which, depending on the context, can mean both prison itself or the top floor of a tiered prison wing, like the one in San Quentin, where Manson eventually served time. But during the same period, icebox could also mean a refrigerator or freezer, and Manson sometimes spoke of how, during his childhood, he saw that other kids were being nursed by their mothers, but instead of mother's milk, his milk always came from the icebox because his mother was in prison. Regarding his paternity, Manson often switched up the exact name. Sometimes he said his father was Eisenhower, sometimes it was the Second World War or the penitentiary, but the meaning was always the same. When Manson was first incarcerated in his early life, the prisons where he was committed were populated by returning veterans of the Second World War and the Korean War. Manson often spoke about how these were his only father figures growing up, as he believed that the incarcerated returning veterans of each generation raise up the next generation of convicts, teaching them the rules of prison life. Manson specifically mentioned an ensign in the Navy named Ferguson and Alvin Creepy Karpis of the Depression-era Ma Barker gang as quote-unquote fathers he had known in prison. And so suddenly, what sounded like psychotic delusions or hallucinations about being the offspring of President Eisenhower and a refrigerator are revealed to be deeply meaningful, with arcane references to Manson's biography and his particular strain of jailhouse philosophy.
Why did Manson go there? Why did they go to that house that night and kill those?
All right, because first of all, Doris Day. This is going to get heavy. Remember the Korean War? The United States lost the Korean War, but they didn't tell the public. When they lost the Korean War, they had to give up their sex to the Koreans.
Doris Day was Terry Melcher's famous actress mother, and there are indications that Manson was in some kind of relationship with her before even meeting Melcher.
When I go to get into the music, the Jew rejects me on the universal level from Cary Grant's parking space because I won't use the black people.
Within 3 months of Manson's 1967 release from Terminal Island Prison in California, he was offered a position as a consultant on a movie being produced by Universal Pictures, which would have featured Jesus Christ being reincarnated in 1960s America as a black man in an allegorical film about prejudice. Manson had already developed a reputation in countercultural circles as something like a guru, and the movie's producer, Gary Stromberg, this is the Jewish man Manson is referring to here, asked the newly released convict to provide advice on the script and possibly record the soundtrack. This role gave Manson access to the Universal lot in Hollywood, and during his later incarceration, he told multiple people, including the author Nicholas Schreck, that he became a hustler on the lot, catering to closeted gay men working in the film industry there. Manson told one specific story where he parked in Cary Grant's parking space, and one of Grant's assistants came out to tell him to move his car. Manson struck up a conversation with the man, and sensing he was gay, went into Grant's office with him, where they had the first of many sexual encounters. Cary Grant was notoriously a closeted bisexual, but Manson always refused to name Grant's assistant, who he'd developed this relationship with. During the same period, Manson allegedly performed the same services for Robert Conrad of the Wild Wild West TV series, and Peter Falk, who is confirmed to have been filming Columbo at Universal at the same time Manson was hustling there. Falk even attended Manson's trial after the murders, and Schreck claims he interviewed someone who heard Peter Falk admit that he'd slept with Manson, saying, quote, "I did the crazy f***er." Gary Stromberg wanted Manson to collaborate with a South African musician on the soundtrack to the movie, and Manson, still steeped in the racism of the penitentiary, refused. In Manson's telling, this led to Stromberg destroying the music he'd already made and attempting to blackball him from the industry.
When I go to get into the music, the Jew rejects me on the universal level from Cary Grant's parking space because I won't use the black people.
Makes a lot more sense when you have that context, doesn't it? In this next clip, Manson is talking about Charles Tex Watson.
He said, this woman took my money, and he sees women lighting my cigarettes, and he's saying, yes, ma'am, open the door for you. In other words, he's a matriarch, I'm a patriarch. He sees the way I'm doing it, he wants to do what I'm doing, so he said he's going to go get his money back. So he went to go get his money back. And he went and he burnt the broad for $5,000. When he beat her for $5,000, some black guy called me and said, I'm Gangster Dan over here, man. You cook my money. I said, look, Gangster man, all you white brothers sort of together. I'm coming up there. I'm gonna burn everybody up and take that ranch. I said, no, you're not around me. You're not. You talk that shit to them little girls. When you come to me, boy, you're gonna have to, because like I'll take your hat home to you. You dig?
So here, Manson is referring to something which is barely covered in either Chaos or Helter Skelter, the Bernard Crowe incident. In the period leading up to the murders, Tex Watson had been in an on-again, off-again relationship with a young woman named Rosina Kroner. Allegedly, both Kroner and Watson were involved in the narcotics trade, and although the exact circumstances aren't clear, Watson believed that Kroner had screwed him over on some kind of drug deal, where she stole thousands of dollars from him. Tex complained to Manson about the lost money, but Charlie thought Tex was soft, hence this part.
He said, this woman took my money, and he sees women lighting my cigarettes, and he's saying, yes, ma'am, open the door for you. In other words, he's a matriarch, I'm a patriarch. He sees the way I'm doing it, he wants to do what I'm doing, so he said he's going to go get his money back. So he went to go get his money back.
But Tex came up with the bright idea to get his money back by setting up Rosina Kroner. Allegedly, according to Nicholas Schreck, Watson told his then ex-girlfriend Kroner that he could get a good deal on marijuana so long as they bought over a certain amount, but he didn't have enough money to buy it himself. There's disagreement as to the exact amount, but Tex told Kroner if she threw in a few $1,000s, they could get a big discount on the sale. Kroner agreed and recruited a well-known LA drug dealer named Bernard Crowe, who went by the street name Lotsapapa, to put up some money for the deal. They collected the money and drove Tex to the building where he said his dealer lived. Then Tex walked in the front door, ran out the back, and went to Spawn Ranch with the cash, somewhere between $2,500 and $5,000, depending on the version of the story. After Tex disappeared with the money, Lotsapapa took Rosina Kroner to an apartment, and again, depending on which story you believe, either tied her up or just held her against her will, intending to essentially ransom her to Tex Watson, her ex-boyfriend. Kroner gave Lotsapapa the phone number for Spawn Ranch, the last place she knew Tex had lived, but Tex had already skipped town with the money. So when Crowe called and asked for Charles, Tex Watson's real first name, the person who answered thought he was asking for Manson and put Charlie on the phone. Crowe, believing he was talking to the man who just robbed him, started threatening to murder Rosina Kroner if he wasn't repaid, and when that didn't work, told Manson that he would bring people to the ranch to kill everyone and burn it down. It isn't known for sure, but it's speculated that he may have said he planned to bring some Black Panthers with him. So then, Manson arranged to meet Crowe, ostensibly to settle the debt. Manson brought family member and Vietnam veteran T.J. Wallerman, along with a buntline revolver, which would later be used in the Cielo Drive murders. And when they got to the apartment, Lotsapapa had 2 men with him, plus Rosina Kroner, allegedly restrained on the bed. The exact sequence of events is fuzzy, but T.J. Wallerman claimed that Manson tried to convince Lotsapapa that he and the people at Spawn's Ranch had nothing to do with Tex's actions, and at one point even got on his knees and tried to give the gun to Crowe, saying, "If you want to take a life, take mine."
And TJ was with Charlie when he blew open the chest with a .22 caliber gun of Bernard Crowe.
Don't be so
you have seen him do violence.
Bill, you sat there and listened to the reasons for that. And if you were in the same position...
Wait, TJ, you admit you saw Charlie shoot a man in the chest?
Sure I did. I also seen everything else that happened. The guy called up and says he's going to cut this girl's head off. And come in, because Tex
wasn't this a drug deal that went bad?
Tex stole the money, and then Tex comes back with this money after and leaves his fiancée there to get her head cut off, and says, "I'm going camping." And we didn't know that until the phone call came. They asked
how far away was the guy when Charlie pulled the trigger?
You want to hear it or not?
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, okay. We went there because there was a screaming, crying girl there that said they were going to kill this girl, and we heard it on the phone because there was 2 phones. She asked for Charlie. Tex's name was Charlie, so I got the other Charlie because I didn't know him as Charlie. I knew him as Tex. When we got there, they had her tied up on the bed, and we got her out of there. And the only reason anybody got shot after Charlie got down on his knees and put the gun in his hand and handed it to the guy, he says, "If you got to take a life, take mine." The guy laughed and says, "It has to be the girl."
So then Charlie shot him?
That's after he...
I know, but then he shot him.
Yeah, with empty rounds.
Why do you mean empty? Did he shoot him, Bill, or did he not shoot him?
Sure, he shot him once in the chest.
Oh, so I'm sorry. I didn't know it was only once.
Manson was convinced that he had killed Crowe until the trial, when Crowe was called to testify. To adhere to the underworld code, Crowe gave limited and/or vague answers to the DA's questions, and only agreed to testify when the DA's office offered to pay his medical bills from the shooting in exchange for his testimony. The Crowe shooting is one of the most important events in the entire Manson saga. Crowe's offhand remark about bringing Panthers to the ranch could explain why Manson was so paranoid about the Black Panthers, since he legitimately believed he had just killed one of them, and it even provides a plausible motive for the attempts to frame the Panthers at the murder scenes. In the underworld ethics Manson enforced within the family, Tex now owed him one. Manson had just killed someone to get Tex out of a jam, he thought, and his sacrifice would have to be repaid, one way or another. And at least in Manson's version of the narrative, it was this event which directly precipitated the bloodshed at the Tate and LaBianca residences.
That reality comes from handball courts and weightlifting piles, and it comes from someone dropping weight on somebody else's head. of somebody owing something, of a blood family debt, that the way it burns back and forwards to where if Watson has got something he can't face and I go face his death for him, then he owes me back.
So once again, Manson is reiterating his jailhouse ethos. He looks at the crimes the family committed the same way he would look at bartering a pack of cigarettes for a tin of coffee in San Quentin.
If Watson has got something he can't face and I go face his death for him, then he owes me back. And then the Frenchman takes his foils and goes off into the battle for me, and I owe him one heart.
The thing Watson couldn't face was the Bernard Crowe shooting. The Frenchman is Bobby Beausoleil. Beausoleil is a French name, obviously. Manson is saying that when Bobby Beausoleil killed Gary Hinman, he did so at least in part to help Manson. When Beausoleil was in Hinman's apartment trying to shake him down for money, Manson showed up and cut Hinman across his face and ear, giving him a serious wound, and left shortly after. According to the killers, Hinman was insisting that he needed to go to a hospital to get the wound treated, but Beausoleil surmised that the hospital would call police and he and Manson would be arrested. So to prevent Hinman from seeking medical treatment and implicating himself and Manson in the assault and robbery, Bobby Beausoleil decided to murder Gary Hinman, a murder for which he was arrested shortly afterward. By the convict code, Tex owes Manson for the Lotzapapa shooting, which at the time they all believed was a murder. And now Manson owes Beausoleil because Beausoleil killed Gary Hinman to keep him from talking to police. So Manson is saying to Tex, instead of paying me back for shooting Bernard Crowe, pay what you owe me to Bobby Beausoleil by getting him out of jail.
Here's the conversation. Indian Mesa. We got 4 campfires. We got 4 queens on a motorcycle gang, a motorcycle group that rides SS motorcycles out of Venice, Santa Monica. So we're riding motorcycles and we're all up there and we got these fires going and we got this big problem that came up. I had to go shoot somebody for Tex. Bobby's in the prison. My brother's in jail. Now, understand in my mind, all my life I've been in jail because I didn't have no one to get me out of jail. I didn't have no brother outside. So I spent years and years and years and years just because nobody would come and sign their name and get me out of jail. And the jail couldn't let me out because I didn't have no place to go. So I spent 22 years in prison because I didn't have nobody outside. I can't let somebody that's with me stay in jail. It just ain't, you know, it's not in my makeup, man. I got to get my brother out of jail.
So you needed money to do that?
Well, here's the division between your mind and my mind. Here's where the chamber opens up. When you get in trouble, you go to your mother. You call up mother. I ain't got no mother to call. Well, you go to the bank, draw some money, pay a lawyer. I ain't got no money. I can't go to no lawyer. I go to a lawyer, I ain't got enough money. I got a little money, and anytime anybody knows anything about lawyers, when you got a little money, they're just taking that. They'll take the little money unless you sue them in court, you dig? In other words, like, I don't have enough money to go to the lawyer to get Bobby out. So everybody's standing around, and I said, pay me. Pay me what you owe me, now. And they said, well, how do we do that? I said, get my brother out of jail. And he said, how do we do it? I said, I don't know how you do it. I don't care how you do it. Do it, now. Do it. And they said, how do we do it? I said, don't ask me how to do it. I don't want to be no part of no conspiracy. But however you do it and get it done now. And they said, well, we don't know what to do. We'll get a lawyer. And then, here, Leslie and Patty, they said, if we get a lawyer, all they're going to do is lie and take our money anyway. Don't invoke me. Do it. Get it done. How do we do it? I don't know. I don't want to be involved in it.
This is Manson's explanation of the motive for the Tate LaBianca killings. He didn't care about Helter Skelter or Terry Melcher. He just needed to get Bobby out of jail. Manson always claimed that he wanted to get Beausoleil out so badly because he remembered being in jail and having no one on the outside to help bail him out. But it seems far more likely that he was just afraid Beausoleil was going to snitch on him for cutting Gary Hinman's ear and get his parole revoked. And so Tex Watson, being an inexperienced criminal, decided to go to Sharon Tate's house on Cielo Drive, either for a home invasion robbery to raise money for a lawyer for Bobby, which was badly botched, or to commit copycat murders to trick the police into thinking Gary Hinman's real killer was still on the loose. This is what's called the love of brother theory of the Tex Watson-Charles Manson murders. The idea that all the murders committed by the family after Gary Hinman were part of a harebrained scheme to get Bobby Beausoleil out of jail.
Why were Sharon Tate, Nino LaBianca, and the others murdered, do you suppose?
There are many levels to that, and I can say...
Is there a simple reason?
There are a number of reasons. One, he explained to you, specifically, it was to get a brother out of jail.
Did it work? Did he get out of jail?
The motive was to get a brother out of jail. That is one reason.
Another thing that becomes clear about Charles Manson interviews once you've seen enough of them is that he was consciously playing a character. The Manson talking to Diane Sawyer was not the same Manson Mary Brunner met in 1967, or even the Manson that sat in a cell every day. You can see it when the interview with Sawyer is over, and Manson thinks he isn't being recorded.
Okay, Charlie. All right.
Hold on, just one second.
Don't forget me on those pictures, gentlemen.
Hold on. Just one. Little one.
You want him standing or sitting?
That's fine. That's fine. Thanks.
And let me give you all another thing. Will you please?
Yeah.
Everybody says I'm 5'2". When I was arrested, I was 5'7". Then I went down to 5'6". Then I went down to 5 foot. Then I went to 4 feet. Now I'm down to 5'2". Pretty soon I'll be 5 feet. By the time that you all die, I'll be about 3 feet tall.
So how tall are you, Charlie?
5'6".
Okay.
And 3/4.
Charlie, you were real nice. Thank you.
Suddenly, he's completely friendly and relaxed. His speech becomes more direct and literal, and he isn't the scary Manson monster he's been playing for the last hour. This is what Manson actually sounded like when he thought no one was listening.
It's like when I got out, I went to Universal Studios, and this Hebrew producer told me he wanted me to help him write the music for a movie about the second coming of Christ. He told me that he wanted me to play music with a guy from South Africa and another guy from Africa. And I told him, man, my uncle would shoot me for doing that. I said, no, I don't play music like that, you know. So then he blackballed me from the music system and then burned all my music up because I wouldn't go along with his trip, see. So what he was doing is he was using the black people on one side of town to play his music and make money, and then he had a Hebrew woman with kids on the other side of town that he was giving the money to. In other words, and I said, oh, you got a little double thing going here, you know. You want to call people racist if they don't use people. I said, I don't use black people. I said, because if I use people, then I'm used by people. So I don't want to be used by anyone, so therefore I'm not going to use anyone, you know. So we had a big thing there, you know, and like, I was going to shoot him, but then I thought, well, if I shoot him, I'll go back to the penitentiary, and I didn't want to shoot him, you know, because I didn't want to go back to jail. So I went through some changes, and I lost the music there, and then the Beach Boys gave it back to me, you know.
To get anything at all out of Manson's words, they usually have to be understood on multiple levels. Sometimes he said exactly what he meant, but sometimes he spoke like a beat poet, using symbols and metaphors to disguise admissions which would otherwise be considered snitching, and it was usually in the context of what Manson considered a performance, playing up his nefarious hippie cult leader persona. This is not to say that Manson was completely sane and rational, or even that he was necessarily telling the truth about the motive, but the impulse to dismiss him as crazy and ignore everything he said just because it's not completely linear or rational sounding is just as serious an error.